Imagine standing barefoot on the razor-sharp grass of the African savanna 2 million years ago, where every breath you take could be your last. A world where lions twice the size of today's kings stalk the tall reeds, where saber-toothed cats wait in the shadows, and where your only weapon is a sharpened stone in your trembling hand. This is not just history. This is survival. This is the dawn of us. Today, you will step into the skin of Homo habilis, our earliest ancestor who dared to shape stone and carve out a fragile existence against impossible odds. And before we dive in, smash that subscribe button right now, because this is just episode 1 of a journey that will take you through blood, fire, and the birth of humanity itself. Don't miss a single twist in this epic survival story. 2 million years ago, long before cities, before fire danced in human hands, before names, before memory, a young Homo habilis crouched low in the golden grasses of the African savanna, his heart pounding with a rhythm older than language, his wide, dark eyes scanning for danger in a world that did not forgive mistakes, and his small band of kin waited behind him, silent as stone, knowing that if he failed to bring down food, the week would not last another night, and if he moved too soon, the predators that ruled this land would claim them all. The sun was merciless, beating down from a pale blue sky that stretched like eternity, and heat shimmered off the cracked soil where zebra herds moved like restless rivers of striped muscle, where ancient elephants with curved tusks the length of a man's body shook the earth with every step, and where vultures circled in anticipation of death, for on this land, death was never far. His name would never be known, his thoughts never written, but in his trembling hands he held a chipped stone, rough, jagged, sharp enough to cut through skin and tendon, sharp enough to mean the difference between life and starvation, and it was here, in this endless theater of survival, that the first true human story began. A story of struggle and discovery, of danger and triumph. A story that would echo through time until it reached us, the modern watchers behind glowing screens, wondering what it must have been like to be the first to carve a future from rock and blood. The small group behind him was no tribe in the sense we know, but a fragile family, 7 souls bound together by hunger and fear. 2 older females with deep-set eyes that carried the wisdom of countless dry seasons. A young mother clutching her infant against her chest, a crippled male whose twisted leg slowed the group but whose knowledge of tracks and scents made him invaluable, and 3 younger hunters like the one crouching now, each lean, each half-starved, each aware that their survival was measured not in years but in heartbeats. The savanna gave little mercy, and as the wind shifted, carrying the musk of zebra and the copper tang of fresh blood, he knew what it meant. Lions were near, hidden in the tall grass, stalking the same prey his band hoped to scavenge, for Homo habilis was not yet the master hunter, but the desperate opportunist, waiting for giants to kill so that he might steal scraps. His pulse raced as he glanced back at his kin, their faces taut with silent pleading, and in that moment he was torn between courage and terror, because one wrong step could draw the lions to them, but one hesitation could mean starvation. And then came the sound, a roar, deep and thunderous, shaking the marrow of his bones, followed by the high-pitched scream of a zebra being dragged down, hooves flailing, dust rising, life extinguished in a storm of claws and teeth. The lions had struck, and for Homo habilis that meant opportunity. He gestured with a flick of his hand, the crude language of his kind not yet words but signals, urgent and sharp, and the group began to creep forward, staying low, weaving through the grass, moving not like hunters but like shadows, drawn by the smell of fresh kill. The young male's mind, simple yet sharp in ways evolution demanded, played out visions of success and failure. In one, they reached the carcass after the lions had gorged and left, hacking strips of meat, filling their bellies, giving the infant a chance to live. In the other, they miscalculated, drew too close, and the lions turned their hunger on them, tearing them apart, their bones left in the sun like so many others who dared to compete. The group inched forward until the scene revealed itself in all its brutal majesty. 4 lions, their golden coats stained red, growling over the zebra carcass, their faces buried in entrails, their massive bodies flexing with each bite. The air was thick with the stench of blood, the buzzing of flies, the choking dust that clung to sweat-soaked skin, and the young Homo habilis felt both awe and dread, for these beasts were gods of the grasslands, rulers of life and death. He knew they must wait, and so they crouched in silence, watching, trembling, hoping. Time stretched endlessly, the sun crawling across the sky, the lions feeding until their bellies swelled, until their interest waned, until one by one they slinked into the shade to sleep, leaving only scraps of flesh, sinew, and bone. But scraps were enough. The crippled male gave the signal, a low grunt in his throat, and the group rushed forward with sudden, desperate energy, swarming the carcass like ants, their stone tools hacking, their fingers clawing, ripping chunks of meat, ignoring the blood that coated their arms, shoving raw flesh into their mouths with frantic urgency, chewing, swallowing, fighting for every bite as if the savanna itself might snatch it away. For a moment, victory tasted sweet, iron on their tongues, life renewed, but the savanna never allowed triumph without cost. A shadow moved, a growl rumbled. From the brush emerged not lions but something worse, a saber-toothed cat, its fangs gleaming like ivory daggers, its eyes burning with hunger, its body coiled with deadly intent. Panic erupted. The group scattered, shrieks tearing from their throats, the mother clutching her infant and running, the crippled male limping frantically, the young hunters darting in different directions, abandoning the kill. The saber-tooth roared, a sound so primal it seemed to freeze the blood, and with terrifying speed it lunged, not at the fleeing group, but at the zebra carcass, claiming it, dragging it into the grass with ease, as if to remind these fragile humans that they were intruders in a kingdom not their own. The young male who had led the raid stumbled, his foot catching in the cracked earth, his stone tool falling from his hand, and for a heartbeat he thought death had come, that the cat would turn on him, end his story before it began. But fate twisted. The beast ignored him, intent on its meal, leaving him sprawled in the dust, his chest heaving, his mind flooded with the raw knowledge of how close life and death danced. Crawling backward, he retrieved his stone, his fingers closing. Around its familiar sharpness, and with wide, terrified eyes he watched the cat vanish into the grass, dragging away the prize. Slowly, trembling, he rose and rejoined his kin, who gathered in silence, their faces painted with blood and fear, their bellies half-filled, their spirits torn between relief and despair. The crippled male grunted, a sound that could mean both, anger and praise, and the group moved on, leaving behind the echoes of roars, the stink of blood, the lesson carved into their bones. Survival. Here was not about victory, but about stealing life from the jaws of death. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fire, the group found shelter among a cluster of boulders, their small bodies huddled together for warmth, their eyes scanning the darkness for predators that prowled at night, hyenas with bone-crushing jaws, snakes that slithered silently, owls whose cries were omens. The infant whimpered, and the young mother rocked it gently, humming a soundless tune, and the young male who had led them sat apart, staring at his stone tool, its edge dark with zebra blood, wondering in ways too primal for words if this was the beginning of something greater, if stones and courage might one day change the balance of power on this land. He could not know it, but in that moment the seeds of humanity were sown, not in triumph, not in mastery, but in the fragile will to endure, to risk, to adapt. And as the stars burned overhead, vast and eternal, the savanna whispered with the cries of beasts, and the story of Homo habilis, the story of us, moved forward, into the unknown. Dawn broke over the savanna like a spear of fire cutting through the endless dark, the pale light spilling across a world where nothing slept easily and everything lived with one eye open, and as the horizon bled gold and crimson, the small band of Homo habilis stirred from uneasy sleep among the boulders, their bodies stiff from the chill of night, their bellies only half satisfied from the scraps of zebra meat they had torn in desperation, their minds caught between the instinct to move and the terror of what awaited in the tall grass, for night was no sanctuary and day brought its own storms. The young male who had led them toward the lion's kill sat upright, eyes scanning the shimmering plains, every rustle in the brush a possible predator, every shadow a threat, and in his chest burned something strange, not just fear, but the faintest ember of determination, as though the stone tool at his side carried a secret power, a promise that life did not have to be merely stolen scraps, that maybe, somehow, they could shape survival itself. The crippled elder grunted, the sound low and guttural, his twisted leg dragging as he moved, yet his nose lifted to the wind, reading scents and signs as only he could, and his sharp gaze fell upon tracks nearby, not of lions this time, nor zebra, but something smaller, swifter, antelope perhaps, or gazelle, their delicate hooves cutting the earth in hurried flight, and his grunt turned into a clicking signal that drew the attention of the others, who gathered, tense and curious, the possibility of real meat igniting a hunger deeper than their bones. They followed the tracks cautiously, weaving through the grass, the air heavy with the buzzing of insects and the distant thunder of migrating herds, until they came upon a clearing where the earth dipped into a dry water hole, its cracked mud, patterned with footprints old and new, a place where prey came for water and predators came for prey, a place of opportunity and doom alike. The young male crouched low, gripping his stone, staring at the faint glimmer of movement in the distance. Gazelle, indeed, delicate creatures grazing nervously, their ears twitching, their slender legs taut springs ready to burst. And though Homo habilis had never brought down such prey before, something in his chest surged, an instinct not quite formed into strategy but burning nonetheless. If lions could kill, why couldn't they? He gestured awkwardly, signaling the others who responded with confusion, their eyes wide, their hands tightening around their crude stones, for to chase prey was madness, to hunt was death, and yet hunger makes fools of caution, and so, against the rhythm of a million years, the band of Homo habilis attempted what had never been their way. They hunted. They crept closer, hearts hammering, every breath ragged, the gazelle lifting their heads, sensing wrongness in the air, and then, with a cry that was not language but raw desperation, the young male charged, his feet pounding the earth, his kin erupting behind him in a storm of grunts and shouts. Stones clutched high, their bodies propelled not by skill but by need, and for a moment it seemed the impossible might happen. The gazelle startled, scattered, bolted, but one stumbled. On the cracked earth, its leg catching, its body tumbling, and in that heartbeat of chaos, the hunters swarmed. They fell upon the gazelle like shadows made flesh, their crude tools hacking, their teeth biting, their voices rising in shrill triumph as the animal struggled, kicked, screamed, but numbers overwhelmed, and soon the earth was painted with its blood, and Homo habilis, for the first time, had killed not by chance, not by theft, but by choice. The group tore at the carcass with wild urgency, meat filling their mouths, blood streaking their skin, and for a fleeting moment they were not scavengers but predators, tasting the intoxicating thrill of victory. But the savanna was never silent, never forgiving, and in the distance came a sound that froze their joy into dread, the cackling laughter of hyenas, dozens of them, drawn by blood, by cries, by fate. The young male's eyes widened as the spotted shapes emerged, gaunt but powerful, jaws designed to crush bone, their numbers overwhelming, their hunger merciless, and in an instant, triumph twisted to terror. The crippled elder barked a warning grunt, but it was too late. The hyenas charged. Chaos exploded. The small band shrieked, grabbed what they could, fled in all directions, clutching scraps of meat, dragging limbs of gazelle, desperate to keep something, anything, while the hyenas swarmed the kill, their cackles echoing through the plains, their teeth tearing, their power undeniable. The young male ran with a strip of flesh clenched between his teeth, his hands gripping his stone, his legs burning with effort, the world a blur of dust and terror, hyenas snapping at his heels until he reached the boulders once more, panting, shaking, collapsing against the stone, his heart pounding like a drum. One by one, the others stumbled in, some with scraps, some empty-handed, all bloodied, terrified, alive. They huddled together, their breaths ragged, their eyes darting, listening to the distant feast as the hyenas devoured what they had claimed. And in the silence after, something unspoken passed among them. They had hunted, they had succeeded, and though they had lost much, they had tasted possibility. The young male stared at his blood-soaked hands, at the jagged stone that had opened flesh, and a flicker of realization, primitive and raw, coursed through him. This stone was more than chance. It was power, and power could grow. Days passed in restless cycles of hunger and danger, each sunrise a gamble, each sunset a fragile victory. They scavenged what they could, dug for roots, cracked nuts between stones, sucked marrow from bones left by predators. But the young male could not forget the gazelle, could not forget the thrill of the chase, the moment where weakness turned into something more, and in his restless energy he began to strike stones together, experimenting, chipping, shaping, his clumsy hands learning. By accident what no other creature on earth had dared, the crafting of tools. The first flakes were small, brittle, cutting his skin as often as they cut wood or hide, but over time the edges grew sharper, the shapes more deliberate, and soon he held in his hand not just a stone, but a weapon, a hand axe, crude but purposeful, a shard of will against the endless savanna. The crippled elder watched, grunting approval. The young mother glanced with wary awe. The others mimicked, clumsily at first, then with growing skill, until the band was no longer empty-handed wanderers, but a group armed with sharp edges, each stone a promise that they were not powerless, not entirely prey. Yet the savanna did not bend easily, and as if to test their newfound courage, the dry season came, harsher than memory, the rivers shrinking to mud, the herds moving farther and farther, the predators hungrier, bolder, more relentless. One evening, as the sun fell and shadows stretched long, the group stumbled upon another band of Homo habilis, strangers, not kin, gathered near a shallow stream, their faces painted with suspicion, their hands clutching stones, their bodies tense as bowstrings. For the first time, the young male realized they were not alone in this ancient struggle, that others like them roamed the same unforgiving land, and with that came danger not from beasts, but from their own kind. The two groups stared across, the water, grunting, shrieking, raising stones, each unsure whether the other meant alliance or death, and for a heartbeat the world seemed poised on the edge of its first war. The young male, his chest heaving, his hand gripping his sharpened axe, felt a strange stirring inside, not rage, not fear, but something new, a desire to show strength without fighting, to claim space without blood, to test whether survival required kinship as well as courage. He lifted his stone, struck it against another, sending sparks of sound into the air, and the rival group paused, watching, confused. For long moments they studied each other, their cries echoing, their signals clumsy, until, slowly, the rivals backed away, disappearing into the grass, leaving the water, the night, and a new question behind. What if the greatest danger was not lions or hyenas, but themselves? That night, as the group huddled once more beneath the indifferent stars, the young male stared at the hand axe resting at his side, and though no words formed, though no stories were told, The truth shimmered in his mind like fire yet to be tamed. Survival was no longer just about running, hiding, stealing. It was about shaping, creating, daring. And in that fragile understanding, in that unspoken vision, humanity inched forward, one chipped stone at a time. Night fell heavy on the African savanna, the air alive with the low growls of prowling predators, the rustle of unseen movement, the cries of creatures meeting their end in the shadows, and the small band of Homo habilis huddled together among the rocks, their bodies pressed close, the infant's whimpers muffled against its mother's chest, their stone tools clutched in trembling hands, because though the sharpened edges gave them courage, courage could not banish fear when the darkness itself seemed to breathe with teeth. The young male who had led them to the lion's kill, who had charged the gazelle, who had shaped the first axe, sat awake while the others dozed in restless fits, his eyes fixed on the savanna stretching out like an ocean of blackness. His ears, straining at every sound, his mind replaying the encounter with the rival band by the stream, and a realization churned in his chest like a storm. The world was not only predators and prey, not only hunger and blood, but something larger, something unfolding, as if every choice they made carved a path forward in ways none of them yet understood. At dawn, when the first rays painted the plains in fire, the crippled elder gave a grunt that drew them all to their feet, scents on the wind again, the musk of antelope, the whisper of life moving toward the shrinking waterholes. They followed. Cautiously, stones in hand, their steps measured, their eyes darting, and soon they saw them. A herd of wildebeest, massive, snorting beasts, restless and tense, their numbers daunting, their hooves churning dust into clouds. To hunt such giants was madness, and yet hunger gnawed, and in the young male's chest the ember of daring burned hotter. He gestured, crude signals, pointing, urging, his kin wary but watching, and then fate intervened, as fate often did in this land. A wildebeest calf, weak and stumbling, separated from the herd, its legs trembling as it lagged behind, a beacon for predators and for the desperate. The band crept closer, hearts hammering until the wind shifted. The calf caught their scent, and with a pitiful bleat it bolted awkwardly, triggering the instinct of the group to chase. They surged forward, stones raised, cries piercing the morning air, their bodies driven by need and by a new, intoxicating hunger to not only scavenge, but to take. The chase thundered across the plains, dust rising, the calf stumbling, the hunters closing, and in a burst of wild triumph the young male leapt, his axe swinging down, striking flesh, the animal collapsing with a cry that echoed like both victory and tragedy. The group descended, hacking, biting, devouring, their voices rising in raw celebration, but the savanna was always listening, always waiting to twist triumph into terror. From the grass came a low, rumbling growl, deeper than any lion, more ancient than the hyenas, and the ground itself seemed to tremble as a massive shape emerged. A giant, short-faced bear, larger than any beast they had seen, its shoulders towering, its jaws gaping with bone-crushing power, its eyes locked on the kill. The air froze. The group shrieked, scattered, the mother clutching her child and fleeing, the elder stumbling, the young male standing frozen for a heartbeat too long, the calf's blood dripping from his axe, the bear advancing like an unstoppable storm. Terror surged, but so too did something else. Rage, defiance, a refusal to yield what had been so desperately won. He raised his axe, bellowed a cry that tore from the depths of his being, a sound not just of fear, but of defiance. A sound that startled even his kin, and for a heartbeat the bear hesitated, confused by this small creature's audacity. Then it charged. The young male turned and ran, heart hammering, the world a blur of dust and death behind him, the bear's roars shaking the air, his kin screaming from the rocks. He stumbled, recovered, stumbled again, until the ground beneath his feet gave way into a shallow ravine, his body tumbling, rolling, his axe clattering away, the bear skidding at the edge, roaring its fury, unable to descend the steep sides. Breathless, bleeding, alive, the young male lay sprawled at the bottom, staring up at the towering shape above, the sun glaring behind it like a halo of death, and in that moment he understood without words. Survival was not about strength, not about teeth or claws, but about endurance, about daring, about finding ways where none existed. Hours passed before he crawled out, battered but breathing, his kin rushing to him, their cries of relief carrying across the plains, and, together, they moved on, weaker in flesh but stronger in spirit. Days stretched into weeks, the dry season deepening, their survival balanced on the edge of starvation. Yet something had shifted. Where once they had scavenged only, now they dared to hunt. Where once they had fled, now they sometimes stood. Where once they had wandered blind, now they began to read the land, to follow trails, to remember places, to gather not just food, but knowledge. One night, huddled against the rocks, the young male struck two stones together in restless energy, and sparks leapt, tiny bursts of light like stars falling to earth. His kin gasped, recoiled, stared, and though the sparks died quickly, though no fire caught, the vision was burned into them. The world could be shaped, bent, changed. And so, step by step, stumble by stumble, Homo habilis walked forward into history. Their story written not in words but in blood and bone, in chipped stone and sparks in the night. A story of fragile bodies and unbreakable will. A story that 2 million years later would be told not as myth but as truth. The story of us. And as the savanna winds howled across the endless grass, as the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, the young male raised his stone once more, his eyes reflecting something new, something defiant, something that whispered of all. The fire, all the cities, all the dreams yet to come. And though he could not know it, his every breath was the beginning of everything.